I'm gonna just get into the evening at hand. My name is Barclay Rafferty. I am one of the new owners of the Garden District Bookshop here in New Orleans, in a very, very, very rainy New Orleans right now. I hope everybody out there is as safe as you can be. We're gonna have a couple of bad days of weather ahead of us, but we're open at the rink. So come on by and visit us. We're very, very excited to welcome Melissa Ginsburg, the author of this new book, The House Uptown. And she's here in conversation with one of our semi-locals. She's here sometimes, Laura Lippman. Here's one of her books. She splits her time between New Orleans and Baltimore. And I'm so thrilled to introduce them and let them jump in. I do want to make a couple of points. They will be in conversation for about half an hour. If you have any questions for either the Garden District Bookshop or for our two authors, please type them in as you to the message board as you think of them, and I'll answer them as best as I can. Otherwise, I'm going to be on mute enjoying the evening. I'll let one more person into the waiting room before I go ahead and let everybody go and turn myself on mute. So Laura and Melissa, it's up to you.
Great. Melissa's going to start by reading from The House Uptown, but I'll give you a brief introduction to Melissa. If you're new to her work, she is a poet and a novelist, and she teaches at Ole Miss. And The House Uptown is her second novel. She has published her poetry in the New Yorker, the Kenyon Review, Southwest Fences. I'm sorry, I'm going through my memory, which is a poor thing. And, she's an outstanding writer. And The House Uptown, if you haven't picked up on this yet, is very much a New Orleans book. And I'm really looking forward to talking about it. It's an outstanding book. It's a really beautiful novel that combines a lot of genres, I think, and in doing so becomes something above and beyond the genres that it's paying homage to. But we'll start now with Melissa reading from The House Uptown.
Thank you, Laura, and thank all of y'all for coming. It's such a pleasure to be here. I wish I really were in New Orleans right now, but I'm gonna read from a section. It's pretty early in the novel. So the main characters, there's three main characters, but two of them are in this scene. So Ava is a 14-year-old girl who has grown up in Iowa City. She's recently orphaned and has come down to New Orleans to stay with her grandmother, Lane. And the scene I'm gonna read is the first time that the two of them are alone in the house. I should add too that they don't know each other. They met once when Ava was a little girl and she doesn't even remember her grandmother. And so Ava's mother has just died, and that's why she's come to New Orleans to stay with Lane. Lane rose from her nap to early afternoon light. Her body felt heavy and weak. She needed to fix an iced coffee, smoke, and get back to her research. The restaurant owners wanted their family members depicted in the painting. They'd sent in photos last week that Lane hadn't even glanced at yet. There was so much to do. What had woken her? Lane had vivid and disturbing dreams. They often left her disoriented, more drained than when she lay down to rest. Lane sighed and stretched, trying to rouse herself. As she shuffled down the long back hall, she heard a noise. Perhaps she'd left the radio on, though it didn't sound like the radio. She listened, a girl's voice. Lane walked to the sideboard where she kept the pistol, took it out of the drawer. She'd heard about these neighborhood break-ins, home invasions. The voice was coming from the enclosed porch above the carport. There was nothing in there to steal besides Mardi Gras costumes, but she supposed burglars wouldn't know that. The door was open. It sounded like the girl was on the phone. Is this what they did now? Chatted casually with their friends as if everyone's homes were their personal space? She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Lane peeked around the doorway. A tall, skinny girl sat cross-legged on the bed. She was pale, with dull brown hair, a nothing of a girl. Lane pointed the gun in her direction and stepped into the room. "Get out of my house," she said. The girl stared, her mouth opened in shock. Lane said again, "Get out." The girl seemed frozen. She didn't take her eyes off the gun. Then she smiled, or tried to. "Lane, you startled me," she said. "Is that real? Is it part of a costume?" Something was off. It was one of those confusing, dreamlike moments. This girl knew her name. Slowly, Lane nodded. "Yes," she said, "it's part of a costume." Lane tucked the gun in the pocket of her dress, the weight of it making the fabric sag. "I need some caffeine," she said. The girl followed her to the kitchen. She was tentative. Lane had no patience for these timid, soft types of girls. This was one of those weak ones, Lane could tell. She hovered in the doorway while Lane fixed coffee. "Is there anything to eat?" Ava asked. "Look for yourself." Lane didn't like being near the girl. She took her coffee and went to her studio. She opened her sketchbook and flipped the pages until she found what she hoped was there, an explanation of some sort. In her own handwriting, she saw a note. "Phone call from Iowa. Louise's friend. Louise is dead. Ava visit June 3rd. Louise is dead. She read the words and watched her mind skip past them without comprehension. The girl was Ava then. She checked the date on her phone. Today was the 4th. It added up. Lane reached in her pocket. Something heavy tugged at the fabric. She pulled out the gun, turned it over in her hand. She must have meant to clean it. Well, she didn't have time for that now. She put it back in the sideboard. Thanks.
Wow, so much going on in that passage when you've read the whole novel. I want to start with not the most important question and a somewhat provincial question, but it has to be asked. I'm very curious about why you chose to set the novel in New Orleans, and place is so important in this novel on almost a granular level. And you tell us that in the title. This is about the House Uptown. The house is a character. The house is a very specific kind of house. So I'd love to hear about what drew you to writing a novel about New Orleans, which is something I don't dare do. It's tricky territory, but you do it beautifully.
Thank you. I mean, I was worried about that. I didn't want to get anything wrong, you know. But I have always wanted to set a book in New Orleans. It's always been a really important city to me. I didn't grow up in New Orleans, but my mother did, and I grew up in Houston and just spent my childhood going back and forth all the time. Just probably more time spent on I-10 than actually in Houston when I was growing up. And this house that is in the novel is based on my grandmother's house over on Coliseum Street. And
where him and what I have to know the cross street. That's how provincial I am.
It's gosh, I should know this. So I should also say in my defense, this house has not been in my family for many years.
It's between State and Webster.
Yeah, State and Webster. Thanks. Yeah.
Excellent.
So yeah, this house was so important to me, and also to my mother, my aunts, my siblings, all my cousins. When we were kids, it felt like this magical place that was had so much just energy coming off of it. And if it really, like, my cousins are reading this book, and my childhood friends, and are just telling me all of their memories too, which I didn't even know about, but sort of ended up in the book. I think the house itself was, my grandmother sold it and we all still miss it, you know. We want to go back in there. Like, the people who bought it have fixed it up. It's much nicer now. But yeah, I grew up raised by New Orleans expats who, I mean, I wouldn't speak for my siblings, but I always felt as a kid that my mom sort of felt sorry for us for not having grown up in New Orleans, like just this sort of pitying kind of thing. So I just grew up with New Orleans as like this touchstone and this sort of legend that was also real and we could go to. And the book is set, like, it couldn't be set anywhere else because these people, I don't think, would have been able to be who they were and come together in the way that they come together in any other place.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I just had to ask. There are just little tiny details that shine throughout the book, and I'm always very timid because I've been a part-time resident of New Orleans for only 10 years, and I feel very much like a newcomer. But then there'd be things like, you know, oh, these pastries are so much better than the pastries at Boulangerie, and just like yes, that's a very New Orleans detail. Okay, I'm glad we went to that. And as I said, it wasn't at all the most important thing. Something I want to talk about is, obviously, I think a crime novel can be a literary novel. And I get why people are kind of framing this as a crime novel. I'm not sure it feels like and it's also being framed as a coming of age novel. And I don't feel that either one of those labels really gets to the heart of it. But obviously I want you to tell me what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely includes some crime novel elements, some sort of thriller structure. And there's certainly crime in it that affects all of these people's lives. I mean, I think it is a novel about a family, and in all of its complexities, and it's a novel about the past and about time and about art, and coming of age. I mean, I think that people talk about it as a coming of age novel because there's a young teen in it, but the focus is not really on her growing up. She's just part of these things that are happening in the book to all of these characters. Yeah, so I do think it's hard to categorize, and it's certainly not.
Way. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't fit too easily in any one genre, I don't think.
I mean, part of the reason I think we have to kind of question it as a coming of age novel is because Ava is the most mature and grounded person in the book. Best I can tell, right? I mean, Ava turns out
that's fair to say.
Amazing resources and this almost preternatural calm and ability to cope very early in the book. And I felt smart that I saw this line and I'm like, this line is singing out to me. I'm going to underline it. I think it's important. Ava, whose mother has died recently, whose mother is the daughter of Lane, is taken to the train station by her mother's friend, Caitlin, who says to her, people aren't good. And I feel like this is the thing the book is wrestling with the entire time. Are people good? Are some, and I mean, please tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I felt that sentence just like burst out at me in like neon. People aren't good. And that's what we struggle with through this entire book.
Yeah, I mean, so that's interesting. I think that there are people in the book who certainly believe that, and Caitlin believes it. But Ava doesn't, not really. And I don't think, I don't think that like that's a kind of moral judgment that I'm not really comfortable making about any of the people in this book. I I think that all of them make mistakes that do not turn out well. They inadvertently hurt people they care about. Um, and sometimes they're incredibly irresponsible and short-sighted. But they are also like doing the best they know how to do. And they are faced with a lot of limitations and a lot of obstacles, um, and and they're not able to understand what the outcome of their choices are going to be. And I think that a lot of the book is about this very human experience that we all have of inadvertently doing harm to people we care about, and how sad that is, and how inevitable it is. And yeah, I mean, it's certainly something the book is concerned with, but I wouldn't agree with Caitlin's statement at all.
But it's a debate that informs the entire book, and we find out, and I have to be careful here because this would venture into, I wouldn't call it a spoiler, but information that I wouldn't want to reveal to someone who has yet to read the book. It turns out that a disagreement about what is right and what is wrong is at the heart of this novel, that it has affected so many people in this novel, whether they know it or not.
Mhm.
And no, I think it's wonderfully generous toward its characters. And of all those characters who are all quite, I mean, I could talk about any of them for long swaths of time, but Lane, and to sketch Lane, I mean, it's apparent in the section that you read, she's an artist, she's gifted, she has a singular focus on her work and is aware of that. I read an interview that you gave where you talked about how you almost envied Lane. And I'd like you to talk a little bit, because Lane is, I have no patience with this discussion about whether characters are likable. So it's so uninteresting to me. And I think it's actually a pretty sexist idea, because it's almost always used in the context of female characters. I don't hear a lot of people talking about whether male characters are unlikable. Lane is so interesting from the moment we meet her. And I would just like to know more about how you conceived Lane and who Lane is to you and how you feel about Lane.
Yeah, well, Lane is a kind of a genius artist, and she also is independently wealthy and has resources to build her life in a way that she can just focus on her work. And I think that this is something that men can do much more easily than women. And Lane resents that and doesn't want to be left out of this thing. She has a vision. She's really, she's not, like, she knows what she's capable of accomplishing, and she's not going to let anything get in her way. And she's not a great mother. She probably had kids because it was expected of her, and so yeah, she's someone that, like, as a writer, as an artist myself, I have often felt very frustrated by all of the things that all of the expectations that are put on women, especially Southern women. And I've also felt really frustrated by all of the just regular things that we have to do all the time that are not making art. So I would much rather hire out house cleaning, taxes, grocery shopping, all that stuff, and never have to think about it. But so part of writing Lane was like this construction of a fantasy. Like, how could it work? Could she make this work? could she live this life where she did not have to stop her work in order to attend to some like daily, task? And what would be possible if she could live that way? So yeah, I am jealous of her. So in the book, she ends up hiring a personal assistant who is essentially like, he's like such a good wife to her, like he just does all the things that she needs done before she even knows to ask for them. And so, and he complains, but he does it. And yeah, so I wish that I could have someone like that in my life, who is basically me taking care of me, like another me,
Yeah, I know, I totally get that. And I mean, something that's really interesting in the book, and it happens so early, I don't feel that I'm giving something away, is that we find out that Lane became a widow at a relatively young age. And she loved her husband. She had a good marriage. She is shocked and saddened when he dies suddenly. But she very quickly realizes how much work husbands are. And that, and later in the book, Lane, I think, literally states, well, I'm not a psychopath. Like, of course I was sad, or maybe it's in that section. Of course she was sad that he died. She's not a psychopath. But I mean, I felt sort of this weird thrill of recognition at that conscious thinking out loud of, well, I'm not a psychopath. I get this. But one of the things that really struck me about the book, and we just referred to the fact that Lane becomes a widow at a very young age, I thought it was particularly striking against the backdrop of the year that we've all just come through. There is so much tragedy in this book, but it's very matter of fact. Ava has lived through, Ava's Lane's granddaughter, both her parents are dead. Lane has seen a husband die. She's seen a lover die. And we find out in the very first chapter of the book that she has helped her lover obscure a criminal event. There's Oliver has known tragedy, the assistant. I was really interested because tragedy in this book accrues in a way that's the opposite of melodrama. Tragedy just is. Everybody's just living with death. And obviously, you began working on this book, I think you said, like 2016. And you were already well into the book when Trump was elected. So obviously, you're well ahead of the curve of the times we're in. But it feels almost kind of prescient that way, to remind us that everybody's life is just full of tragedy and sadness and dark things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the human condition, right? And it affects how we are with other people, how we build our lives, how we shape what our lives look like, what we do, who we are. And I think that one of the things that draws me to write novels is exploring that thing. Like, how do people negotiate like pain, things that are just too painful to accommodate? Like, we all do it anyway. So like, how does that play out? So that's one of the things I'm certainly interested in as a writer, and I wanted to explore in this book. And it's, these are all characters who have been through Katrina too, and have lost lots and lots of people and have seen their city change in ways that they aren't crazy about, or comfortable with. And yeah, so there's it's just how time works, and it's what happens when you're alive, and I wanted to just explore that.
The novel is also really interested in silence. There's so many references to, and it's also, and this is very important to the character of Artie, who we meet in the first chapter when he's 14, and later we will see him as a, young politician or would-be politician on the rise. He's obsessed with this idea of the world he can't get to, that there's a secret where does this come from? It felt so urgent and intense in the novel. And I thought, it's like this idea of, is it an adolescent drive, or is it particular to Artie, this idea that there's something there I'm trying to grasp and it's always out of reach, and this restlessness and the consequences that this restlessness has for him.
Yeah, I think that is a really adolescent thing. Artie is 14 at the beginning of the book, and the book moves around in time, so we see him both as an adult and as a teen. He is old enough to be very interested in the adult world and too young to enter it. His parents keep pretty close tabs on him. He's got a close family, and he is, he's frustrated in the way that like kids who just want to be able to drive and go somewhere by themselves without their mom are frustrated all the time, But yeah, for him, it's so connected to the city, to all of the people's lives behind the walls of everyone's houses in New Orleans. Like, he just wants access. He wants to know everybody. He wants to see how everybody lives. And he feels incredibly lonely too, I think. A lot of these characters are very lonely. They have trouble connecting with other people in ways that are fulfilling for them. Yeah.
Lane and Artie both seem to me to deal with the problem of, believe me, this is not my problem, of being charismatic. And with Lane, you don't really see that until that one scene in the restaurant when Delia comes up to her, and it seems the scene's going in one direction, and then Lane's pronouncements to Ava about what has just happened just flip it so suddenly. But also with Artie, it's something that he and Lane share that I'm not sure either one of them understands, that this is something they have in common, which is the burden of being someone that other people want something from, want to be around. Did you see them as sharing that, or as just?
I hadn't thought about it actually, but I thought about it really explicitly with Artie. I talk about it in the book. When he's a little kid, he's like in preschool, and all the other little kids are like shoving each other just to get to him and like share their toys with him. And he's just a normal little kid. He doesn't understand why. And it's certainly not because he did anything that was special. He's just standing there. So Artie is troubled by this and tries to manage it by living up to it, by being very gregarious and kind and interesting. He tries to earn it. And Lane, Lane's focus for years is like, how can she make her world smaller and smaller so that it is only art? And other people in all of those interactions and all of the pleasantries of when you run into somebody you haven't seen in a while, or like being polite to wait staff or whatever, feel like a burden to her. But she is successful and people admire her, and she's reclusive. So when she goes out, she does get attention, and then it exhausts her. Yeah.
Really clear from it. And it's so interesting because in the scene, it feels like it's going to be one kind of scene, and then it's that post-mortem where Lane describes to Ava what just happened. like, wow, like, oh, okay, now I get it. We're moving to the point where we have questions. I've only seen one question so far. It's an interesting one. Someone asked about, it seems obvious to me, but it was like, why is there so much marijuana and alcohol use in the novel?
Yeah.
Yes.
So well, the characters here are they're New Orleans characters. They grow up in this world where it's so where like alcohol and also marijuana are so much a part of the culture and so much a part of every social gathering from when they're young. So it's not like a forbidden or exotic thing to them, but also they're all self-medicating in their own ways. They're people who are suffering and who are also dealing with like various kinds of avoidances and various kinds of medical conditions too, that it's easy to I wouldn't call anybody in the novel like an addict, but it's certainly part of daily routine, and they don't think anything of it.
Self-medicating strikes me as, another thing that's going on in the novel, and maybe I was projecting onto it, but I feel that most readers will be nervous about Lane's mental state.
Mm-hmm.
That you're definitely being asked to wonder, is her kind of deliberate out of itness, is it something that she's just willed as an artist, or is she actually having the beginning of some kind of memory related issues?
Yeah, the memory problems are real. And when someone is as isolated as Lane is, it can be pretty easy to go a long time without anyone noticing that. She doesn't have a whole lot of responsibilities. So it's not like she's making visible mistakes or, Oliver's aware of it, but this is, it's the beginning stages of some kind of undiagnosed dementia. And when you're with somebody every day who is undergoing that, you don't always see it right away because you just see the person. And it's easy to dismiss, like, oh, well, she left the stove on or forgot her keys. Like, everybody does stuff like that sometimes, so it really takes an outside perspective to see how far along something has gotten. And Ava comes in from the outside, not knowing Lane, and sees right away that something is wrong, but she's a kid and doesn't know what it is. So that's like this looming thing for all of these characters, this thing that they're all afraid of and no one can control.
Also Oliver, it's interesting because there's a really thin line between the job of assistant and the role of enabler. Like how you actually, as I actually have an assistant on whom I'm just so profoundly dependent. Today, I actually found myself thinking, oh, I wish she'd been CC'd on this email, because then when I replied, she would be so proud of me for doing this all by myself. But yeah, really, assistants are professional enablers. It is Oliver's job to enable her. Mm-hmm. That's what he's paid to do. And I found Oliver it's hard to talk about it again without giving too much away, but Oliver is just such an interesting character. Where did he come from?
Oliver, I mean, so Oliver's role as assistant came from Lane's just desire for somebody like this. And he needed to be the kind of person who would put up with Lane. She's difficult, who would admire her, who would love her, who would call her on her bullshit, you know? And can I say that? I'm sorry. I just said curse words. And who would be able to like interest Lane enough for them to be together for a long time. And so I wanted him to be able to do this job and also care about her, but not be a pushover, you know? So Oliver just sort of, I mean, he's, in terms of personality and like the way that he thinks, he's probably the closest to me personally. Like, I'm nothing like Ava. I'm not like Lane most of the time, you know, but Oliver is really, like I drew just on myself and my friends a lot for Oliver.
He's a great character, and it's hard to talk about without giving too much away about
He's
the
a
book.
smart aleck.
And he also, I mean, he kind of goes to the heart of this idea in the book where, you know, Caitlin says people aren't good, but yeah, that's too simplistic. And, you know, Oliver is good, and Oliver can also screw up and make mistakes, which is, you know, I think the story of almost everyone in this book. We've got about 5 minutes left. If people have some questions, type them in. I can see them in the chat. You know, I'm glancing at my notes. I like, sometimes I'm like, what did that say? What was I trying to say there? I was very struck, actually. I do think there's a great tradition in coming of age novels about the summer visit in particular. Yeah. There's something about that. And I was trying to think of one. I was like, wow, you know, I could almost read a version of To Kill a Mockingbird that's told completely from Dill's point of view. The character just comes in and out. But there was definitely that, and that wonderful atmospheric feeling of New Orleans in the summer. And I think if people love New Orleans, they actually kind of love it in the summer. I mean, I just had a conversation with someone tonight. The annual Crime Writers Convention, BoucherCon, is supposed to be in New Orleans this August, and people have all sorts of mixed feelings about it. And I'm like, well, it's like, I love being in New Orleans in August.
I love New Orleans in August too.
I think if you really get New Orleans, you love it during those hot summer months. There's something about it. I'm really curious because you have a book of poetry. You were at Sunset City, which was a crime novel.
Yeah.
Now you've written The House Uptown. I'm really curious about what's next.
Yeah, well, I do have another book of poems coming out next year, next fall. It's a weird little book about paper dolls and the Apollo moon landing. It's called Doll Apollo. So I'm always writing poems. My next fiction project is really, like, I haven't started it yet. I'm just kind of beginning to think about it. So it's a little soon to talk about, but
Understood.
I would probably, I mean, it will be set either in New Orleans or somewhere on the coast, the Gulf Coast.
Are you ever tempted to write fiction set in Oxford?
You know, I feel about Oxford like what you said at the beginning. I've only been in New Orleans 10 years. I've been in Oxford 10 years, and it is not, like, it's not my town. I love it here. I hope to stay here for a really long time. But I don't understand it. I don't feel like I know what's going on enough to write about it. Also, it's so small. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to think about setting something in a town this small.
I get that. How do you feel about, if it's not asking too much about what you might write next, will it be something that accepts the pandemic or the post-pandemic as part of its reality, or will you put it in? I mean, it's interesting right now for me reading fiction that's clearly set before the pandemic. Even when it's a serious, lovely novel such as yours, it becomes a form of escapism.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, this is a serious, smart book, but it's also not a book that took place after 2019. And so I get to just sort of have that one. It's very comforting in a weird way to read books that take me away from our contemporary lives. So have you thought about this issue of, shall I or will I not incorporate the pandemic in what I write next?
I have not thought about it. I have thought about it with poetry, actually. I have a book of poems that I wrote during, like, I started it just before the pandemic started, and it's in draft, but it's mostly done. And I think that I'm going to go through and remove a lot of references to quarantine and stuff like that, because I don't want it to be so tied to this time. And I think that it can be emotionally informed by it without talking about it real directly. But with fiction, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't set a book in 2019 or 2017 New Orleans and not talk about Katrina,
Right.
Or else it's like science fiction, So yeah, I think it would depend a lot on who ends up being in the story and how they've been affected by it. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
I'm going to ask one last question, and I think we'll be out of time, and I don't see any more questions from the people attending. Nabokov, in writing Lolita, liked it, and if we can believe him or not, he would talk about the first shiver of the idea, which he claimed was that a gorilla in a zoo had learned to draw, and the first thing he drew was the bars of his own cage. But I'm always, always curious with any novelist, what was the first shiver of the idea with the House Uptown?
I mean, I remember the first thing I wrote, which was just the scene at the beginning when Ava is on the train, headed to New Orleans. I don't know. I had this book in my head for so long before I started writing it. I had just lived with these characters. I'm a very slow writer, and it's such a commitment. So I always want to make sure before I start that it's something I really can spend the next half decade of my life doing. So yeah, these people were just like in my head, and they were not going away. And I started just caring more and more about them. I mean, it started with Lane and Ava. I wanted to write about dementia. It started with the house, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the house is the first character. I mean, the house, again, I don't want to give too much away, but the house really asserts itself as one of the major characters in the book in a most beautiful way. If there are no more questions, we've reached.
Oh, I do. There is a question in the chat.
I don't see it. Okay, let me look at it.
How did you choose the reader of your audiobook? Yeah, so I like the people at Flatiron sent me some audition tapes, and I got to listen to them. And it was really important to me to find someone who could would not try to do a Southern accent wrong, So there were a couple of actresses that I listened to, and we went with this one. So Yeah, it's one of those things where like you get an email and they're like, you need to decide in 10 minutes. Tell me right now. So
Right.
it wasn't like a
Few little
decision I
links.
labored over. Yeah.
Any more
Well,
questions?
I was just going to say, I very much appreciate that. I actually had a question, but I accidentally wrote it to the people in the waiting room and not to the consensus group. I'm fascinated by the art world in New Orleans specifically because there are so many ties to all of the other varying worlds. There are lots of parallel sequence, like, ties, right? But it's not necessarily the same. And specifically the art world is really its own enclave. How did you study that so that you understood how the art world in New Orleans was different from the art world in another city or town?
I mean, I know a few artists in New Orleans, but I didn't study it. Maybe I don't know the art world that well in other I just kind of wrote, yeah, I didn't put a ton of research into that. So I also would not be surprised if you were like, and you got it wrong,
No, not at all. I actually think it was on point. So that's why I was really interested
Good. Yeah. I
in
mean, I
your
know
assessment.
some painters, I know some sculptors, and like I just hung out with them a little bit. And yeah, so that's
One of my
That's where that came
heroes as a writer is Donald Westlake, who is best known for writing the books about a thief named Dortmunder. But I mean, I remember when Westlake died, he'd written so many books that no one could actually, there was like about 100 is what they thought.
Yeah.
And he had written 2 books about journalists. And when I got to meet him, I was like, were you ever a journalist? You got everything right. And he said, no, I just thought the thing about being a novelist was I got to make everything up. And his larger point was that if you think very hard and very carefully about what you're creating, you're probably going to get it kind of right, which I would say my experience over 2 decades of publishing is more often than not, that has been true. I mean, the people who like guns are always going to find, anybody, but if you really think about the worlds that you're creating, you somehow just get it right because you're thinking so hard about it. It's almost like method acting I guess would be the best comparison.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Any more questions?
Well, it looks like we actually had some people who missed the discussion because it turns out the power has been off in parts of New Orleans, probably uptown, who knows? But thankfully not at the Garden District Bookshop. So we're really thrilled that we were able to facilitate this conversation, and so many thanks to Melissa for writing this book, and so many thanks to Laura for helping us engage the author and really explain her thoughts about New Orleans, which as a native New Orleanian, I very, very, very much appreciate. I personally am excited to finish this book. I have not finished it yet, but I'm thrilled to go home tonight. It is available at the Garden District Bookshop, and thanks again to everybody who has been out there. For those who didn't see the entire discussion, we'll be posting it on our Facebook channel and our YouTube channel as well.
Thank you. I can't say enough wonderful things about this novel. It's just really outstanding and beautiful and gorgeously written, as poets infuriatingly tend to do when they write fiction.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And Laura, thank you for these great questions too. Thanks everybody for coming.
I'm going to try the graceful Zoom exit. Always hard. Bye.